Howdy, I'm Matthew Free, and today I am out here at Aggie Park. This is a pond that I've become pretty familiar with since it first opened in 2022. I normally come here and I love to go fishing or hang out by the pond, but today I'm going to be doing something a little different and filming a deep dive, going over some of the key aspects that make this pond what it is. But before we start doing that, I think it's important to take a look at some of the physical characteristics that are very basic to the pond, so that we can develop a greater understanding and dive into some of the more detailed topics later.
Texas A&M University is the primary owner of Aggie Park Pond and has contracted Lockow Ranch to construct and manage Aggie Park. Since this pond is in a park setting, you'll find it completely encircled by a walking path for visitors and has grassy or gravel banks around the water's edge for easy access. Further up on the bank, there's plenty of oak and maple trees for visitors to relax under. Also, at the north and east ends of the pond, you'll find some man-made waterfalls. Although the university does own the pond, they are under special deed and permitting restrictions from the state of Texas, more specifically Texas Parks and Wildlife, as well as the city of College Station. In terms of specific physical characteristics, the pond is approximately 4 acres with depths ranging from 1 to 2 feet at its shallowest end to 12 feet at its deepest point. Once construction on the pond was initially completed, water supplied by the city of College Station was originally used to fill the pond, but now rainwater serves as our primary water source. Should the water level get too low, city water can once again be used as needed. When it comes to watershed, since the pond is located in the heart of campus, the main watershed area would be the surrounding university. Lastly, as far as our soil quality for the pond goes, according to Texas A&M University AgriLife Extension, alkaline, loamy, dark surface soils and clay subsoils are the primary soils in the Brazos Valley, so it would be wise to assume this is what makes up the primary soil quality for our pond today.
So we have this amazing pond here, but what's its primary purpose? I'd say it serves as a place where students and other Aggies can come together and enjoy the outdoors, whether that's through fishing or having a nice body of water to come sit by while you're studying. But since I'm a fisherman, I would really like to see this turned into a place where I can come and consistently catch big fish. In order to achieve my goal, I would stock more bait fish, install more cover, reduce fishing pressure because I'd argue it's extremely overfished right now, and finally, I would implement a policy where all bass under 14 inches need to be culled. In order to have a good fishing spot, one of the most important things is to make sure you have good water quality. With Aggie Park being located in such an urban area, there are several threats to the quality of the water. One of the main being polluted runoff. Stormwater runoff in urban areas like this can carry dangerous chemicals or trash into the water. Another threat would be nutrient enrichment. Sometimes excessive inputs of nutrients from lawn care products or fertilizers will lead to eutrophication, which promotes harmful algae blooms, oxygen depletion, and degraded water quality. At the moment, though, none of this seems to be an issue, as Aggie Park is doing a great job at supporting all kinds of diverse life. Okay, so now that I've covered the quality of the water here at Aggie Park, it's time to do one of my favorite things, which is go fishing so I can assess which fish species live here. As far as I know, there's largemouth bass, hybrid striped bass, channel catfish, and rainbow trout. There were redfish stocked in here when the pond first opened, but I don't think it went over very well because I only caught one and it was pretty sickly looking. There were also a bunch of dead ones scattered along the shore, and it's been over a year since I've caught one or I've seen anybody else catch one, so I doubt there's any still in here. It's also important to note that since the pond is still fairly brand new, there's no unwanted fish species yet. Everything in here was stocked with a specific intent, but as the pond gets older, you're likely to see some fish in here that weren't originally planned. Just casted my line out, and while I'm waiting for a fish to bite, I wanted to talk about what kind of wildlife I've observed living here. So far, I've seen a healthy population of mallard ducks, red-eared slider turtles, and while I was fishing here a few weeks ago, late one night, I observed what I believe to be was an otter. The mallard ducks and turtles are tolerant of almost all water temperatures and water conditions, whereas the otters prefer clean water with minimal human disturbance, but they are very adaptable. Mallard ducks feed primarily on the fish food from the feeder and different types of aquatic vegetation. The turtles that call Aggie Park home prefer aquatic vegetation, small fish, and decaying material like dead fish. Our populations of turtles and ducks here at Aggie Park are relatively small, so they don't have any significant impact on the pond. However, otters are a real problem as they feed mainly on fish and have an extremely high metabolic rate.
This means they need to constantly be feeding. I have only observed one at Aggie Park, but that is still enough to do significant damage to a population.
Now that I've gone over that, I'm gonna check on my rod and see if I've got anything. The first catch of the day, we've got a small largemouth bass. I'm gonna let this guy go really fast so I don't keep him out of the water for too long, and then I'll talk more about him here in a second.
Largemouth bass generally prefer still moving warm water that's high in oxygen. You can most commonly find them on submerged cover in aquatic vegetation, but in Aggie Park, largemouth bass are very inconsistent about where they will be found in the pond. Fluctuating water temperatures, different weather conditions, and time of day will all impact where they will be more or less distributed. It is common to find them within the limited structure and cover the pond has to offer, often getting up under the bridge or hiding in the rocky waterfalls and weeds. When feeding, bass mostly eat crawfish, frogs, insects, and other small fish species. Typically, during spring, once the water is between 55 and 75 degrees, largemouth bass will spawn. They move to shallow water with a hard bottom where the male will fan out a bed onto the bottom substrate, then a female will come lay eggs to be fertilized. The male will guard the eggs in small fry for a total of about a month.
This is a hybrid striped bass I just caught. I'm gonna let this guy go really fast just so I don't keep him out of the water for too long.
Hybrid striped bass prefer much of the same food and conditions as largemouth bass, mainly eating things such as crawfish, insects, and other smaller fish species and favoring warm water. In the wild, they will commonly swim upstream with white bass or striper in an attempt to spawn despite being unable to do so due to being a hybrid. Here in Aggie Park, they are very inconsistent in where they can be found but prefer open water and will move towards the feeder when it goes off. So unfortunately, it did start to rain before I got the chance to catch a channel catfish or a rainbow trout, which I wasn't really expecting to catch a rainbow trout this late in the year anyways, just because the water is so warm and most of them have died off by now. But both of these species are primary species here in Aggie Park, and I think it's important I talk about them. The first fish I want to talk about is the channel catfish. This species prefers warm water temperatures and is tolerant of almost any water conditions, even being known to enter brackish water. For habitat, deep pools with structure and slight current is ideal year-round. Channel catfish primarily feed at night, with juveniles mostly eating insects, while the adults are largely omnivorous, feeding on things such as insects, crawfish, fish, and even some plant material. Around late spring to early summer, when water temperatures are on average 75 degrees, is when they begin to spawn. Males will select nest sites, which are normally dark, secluded areas such as cavities in drift piles, logs, or undercut banks. A female will come to lay eggs, then the male will fertilize and guard the nest until the fry are about a week old. Here in Aggie Park, channel catfish are primarily distributed around the southern end of the pond, staying in its deepest parts during the day and being more distributed at night while they are feeding. Lastly, and probably my favorite fish to catch at Aggie Park, just because it's something you don't catch every day here in Texas, is the rainbow trout. They thrive in cold, clear, and clean water, preferably with a good amount of current. Once water temperatures reach 70 degrees for an extended period of time, they will slowly begin to die off. This is why they are stocked in Aggie Park each year over Thanksgiving break, and you will typically only be able to catch them until around late February to early March. Trout commonly feed on things such as insects, snails, crawfish, and smaller minnows, but in Aggie Park, they'll also be eating food from the feeder. While trout are unable to spawn in Aggie Park, when in a more natural setting, trout spawn in water temperatures around 45 degrees. A female clears out a gravel bed and lays her eggs, which are then fertilized. After this, the eggs are then covered and left to hatch. In Aggie Park, you'll commonly find trout staying in or around the current created by the two waterfalls and waiting by the feeder for food.
Another important thing to talk about is the kinds of aquatic vegetation here at Aggie Park. The main three are coon's tail, smartweed, and filamentous algae, so let's talk about those.
The first and most common kind of vegetation that I found in the pond was filamentous algae, commonly referred to as pond scum. Filamentous algae is made up of single cells that form long, visible chains, threads, and filaments that intertwine to resemble wet cotton or wool. This algae grows along the bottom of the pond like a dense mat in shallow areas during the spring. When it begins to decompose, gases get trapped in the filamentous strands, causing large floating mats. Because of this occurrence, it can be both a floating and submergent plant. When I went to collect vegetation samples, it was found around the entire perimeter of the pond except under the bridge, possibly due to the lack of light. The algae was growing mostly in shallow water with more excessive growth occurring on rocks in areas with lots of current. The second most common type of aquatic vegetation I've seen in the pond is referred to as coon's tail. It was also growing around the entire perimeter of the pond, mixed in with the algae, except in areas with current where I saw no growth. Its growth even extended into deep water where I pulled it up while fishing, growing in depths greater than 5 feet. Coon's tail is rootless and free-floating. It has long branching, brittle, and a core-like stem with forked leaves growing from it. This plant is classified as a type of submerged vegetation due to it being mostly entirely underwater. Finally, I observed a plant at the northern end of the pond called smartweed. It was growing only in very shallow water, closest to the shore or even on the shore. This plant has alternating sword-shaped leaves and contains clusters of fruit closest to the ends of its branches. Because this plant is growing primarily in the water and emerging from it, this plant is classified as an emergent plant.
In conclusion, what are my recommendations for the pond and when can we implement them? Starting with the pond's construction, it's overall very well constructed and I've yet to observe any noticeable leakage. The pond has great topography with multiple deep holes and shallow flats, including a gravel bottom, which is good for spawning fish. The pond features multiple waterfalls, which create current and aeration, as well as bubblers throughout the pond for supplemental aeration. The only problem with the construction of the pond is that it lacks any substantial fish habitat and is almost entirely open water without any true cover. One of my initial goals for the pond was to improve habitat for the fish, and this goal remains. I would recommend dropping in trees or artificial structures into certain areas of the pond to fix this issue. This will enhance the habitat and provide more fish assemblage points. As far as the pond's water quality goes, I would recommend taking a sample and sending it off to get tested. This way you have a more accurate understanding of the health of your water and how to proceed should there be a problem. Also, since the pond is located in an urban area and it's susceptible to pollution and trash, I would recommend diverting water away from your pond or filtering it before allowing it to enter. Regarding Aggie Park's biodiversity and fish populations, my recommendation would be to continue to allow Lockhow Ranch to maintain the pond as they have done an amazing job so far. The only things I would change to achieve my goal of growing bigger bass would be to stock more bait fish, as there are almost none now, and to implement an under 14-inch harvest policy. This way, there's more food with less competition for it and the best genetics will remain in the gene pool. I would also recommend putting into place a policy so that only Aggies and their families could fish the park to reduce fishing pressure. With that, it's also important to remove all otters from the pond as soon as possible because one alone can destroy a fish population. Lastly, for my recommendations on vegetation, Aggie Park has a healthy amount of vegetation covering about 20 to 30% of the total surface area. At the moment, the pond doesn't have any invasive species and contains a good amount of vegetation, but should there be a significant increase in aquatic vegetation or the growth of an invasive species, I would recommend looking into different management or removal strategies, but for right now, nothing needs to be changed. So for all the recommendations I just gave, let's talk about a timeline on when we can implement them. I would say stock bait fish now since it's currently the time of year to do so. It's also important to remove the otter as soon as possible. This way it can't continue to eat into fish populations. Inserting more cover is something that doesn't need to be done right away, but it shouldn't take more than a day to complete. Taking a water sample and having it sent for testing won't take a significant amount of time to do, but I would suggest having it done within a month. Finally, my recommendations about culling fish and who can fish at Aggie Park is policy-based, so it can be implemented within a month. Okay, so with all that being said, that is my deep dive into Aggie Park and some of my recommendations for it. Thanks for watching.